Well, what good words we've already heard. And I'm a firm believer that the word spoken in the church, regardless of where it comes from, is a word for somebody here. So I know that when Lenore shared, some of you here today went, I need to listen to that. And when Ray gets up, we all stand back and we all listen and go, okay, there's some good stuff there and, challenging for us. And I get the great privilege of being able to share as well. So to be honest, what I'm going to share with you is just the same as what you've read. I just took the word, listened to what God spoke to me, and he helped me to see some things that I could share with you. Remember, this principle I taught you is that God, when he speaks to you, it always has more than one meaning, one message, okay? The first message is for you. God speaks to your heart. But I always believe there's a second message. There's somebody else who you could share that with. The more you read, the more God speaks to you. You'll find yourself in life situations where you'll say, I was reading just this week. And you can share the very thing, like Lenore, you could share that with someone in a coffee room or, wherever it might be. There's always that second meaning for what God's taught you. Just a little bit update on where the Akers are at with the transition. And yes, it's sad. In just a little while, it'll be our last Sunday here officially. This afternoon at about 1 o'clock, there's a big truck turning up at our place. And nearly all of the furniture and goods is going to Sydney. And so that's just another step along the way of the transition that we're following God wholeheartedly, but our hearts are still stuck here with you because we love you so much and we appreciate you. So it's one of those, tensions where you're doing what God calls you to, but it doesn't always feel right. It's worth thinking about that, isn't it? Sometimes God calls you. It doesn't always feel right. Sometimes you lose some things to gain some things, and that's the tough part of following God. But he always knows best, and so we trust him. Last time I spoke on, the title of my sermon was Warnings for Wannabe Super Apostles. And so it's a bit of a warning because there are some of us who like to be church critics and church fixers. And we like to sit back in some ways and we love to get a little group of people together and say, the church, if it just got fixed, it would be better if it was like this. And so we talked about how there are some warnings for people who want to be in that kind of a place. And we did this by looking at the church in Corinth, and where Paul had spent some time trying to correct the Corinthian believers and saying, stop trying to put people on pedestals, stop trying to make things better than they should be. You've got to think clearly about this. And he said, this is damaging. When you focus on people and trying to fix the church, then in some ways it's damaging. And we learned last time I spoke that there are some things that matter and we've got to keep it simple. We learned that only following Christ matters. We learned that the gospel can't be fixed. You can't make it more palatable. We learned that we aren't as clever as we think we are, that God is. We learned that we should take a good look at what we're building, because what we're building must only be on the foundation of Christ, because that's what will last. And this week, as Pastor Nathan mentioned, we've been reading through some pastoral epistles, Paul's letters to friends and to churches. And it's nice to be able to read them and to see the bigger picture of Paul's ministry. And you get flavors and themes as you look through that. And one of the, trying to think about what to preach about today, there's so much stuff in there. And so it makes it difficult because there's so much, and easy because there's lots to choose from. But nevertheless, there's a few things to look at. But I couldn't go past some instructions for leadership in the church. If you looked at that, you would have seen in Timothy and in Titus, Paul articulates some ways that leaders can actually be engaged in the church. Some things you'd look for if you were looking for leadership in the church. And I thought, what better place to start than to start right there? So this is not one of those messages for super apostles. This is a message for leaders. And what I felt like today's message actually ties in a little bit with what I spoke last time. Last time it was about warnings for super apostles, and this week I've titled the message Advice to Wannabe Leaders. So we had warnings for wannabe super apostles and advice for wannabe spiritual leaders in the church. And I'll be drawing from specifically 1 Timothy chapter 3. Of course, if you're familiar because you've already read this, you'll see that there are some ideas about leadership spattered around in that particular set of books, but I'm going to concentrate on 1 Timothy 3. Today's message is a message for anyone at Hills who wants to truly engage in the life of the church in leadership. Today's message is for those who want to truly take on the responsibility of leadership in the church. This is a message for those who have a passion to actually take on the role of leading others in spiritual life. It's the opposite kind of message to what I preached last time. This is not a message for those who sit back to pontificate about the church. This is a message for people who actually want to engage in leadership in the church. It's like a how-to message. It's like saying, here's how you can truly take on quality leadership in the life of Hills Church. Here's how you can actually make an influence on the direction and purposes of the local church. So in a way, for those of us who like to sit back and go, the church could get fixed if this is the way it was, here's some advice on how you can actually get involved and see the church be everything she should be. Here's how you can actually make an influence on the direction and purposes of the local church. Here's how to rise up to leadership in Hills Church. So if you've ever thought to yourself, I wonder what it takes to be a leader in the church, a spiritual leader in the church. Or, I wonder if I could ever become a spiritual leader in the church. I'm going to tell you today how. Today I'm going to help you with a few things that you can do that will help you take on a leadership position, an influential leadership position in the local church. And to do this, we're going to look at chapter 3 of 1 Timothy, and I want to begin with verse 1. And in verse 1 of chapter 3 of Timothy, it says this. This is a trustworthy saying, or this saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. So I want to just start at the start and say this. The desire to lead the church in a spiritual way is a noble task. It's a noble thing. So if you've ever sat back and thought to yourself, I would like if God helped me to lead the church in a spiritual way, then that's a noble thought. And that's a noble aspiration. And what's not noble is to sit back and to fold your arms and to point at the church and say she should fix herself, and I know some ways that she should. What is noble is to desire to take on a spiritual role in the life of the church and to lead spiritually. Now, of course, I know because my dad's here and he's going to be asking about hermeneutics and the principles of Bible study. And is this really talking about just general leadership in the church or not? It's not. This word overseer means bishop, and it means overseer of many churches. That's what that word is translated to. So it technically is specifically for those in leadership of many churches. But later on in the passage, you'll see it about leadership in the church, and you'll see the very same principles listed. And really what they are is principles for selecting spiritual leaders for the church. And so I want to share those to you, and I want you to understand that these are for you as much as they are for a bishop. These are the kinds of things that God looks for leaders in the church. You know, and they're pretty important criteria. So I'm going to begin by looking at verse 2. So in verse 1, we can see that the desire to lead spiritually in the church is a noble desire. It's a good thing. So if you've ever had that desire, let me just tell you today at Hills Church, let's think of this 2,000 years ago. Let's think of this today. If you've ever had the desire to spiritually lead in the church, that's a good thing. But it requires a certain concentration of key issues that we need to look at. So we're going to look at these key issues. Remember, this is how to. How could you be recognized for leadership? How could you be involved in leadership? I'm going to give you, as quick as I can, some principles for this. The first principle comes from chapter 3, verse 2. We read that verse. It says, "Therefore, an overseer or a leader must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach." Now, before you get caught up on some of these words, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and bring them into the 21st century. I'm going to try and help you see them in the light of the principles that are contained in these words, because I think that'll help you to see how you could be involved. And the first one I'm going to call personal integrity. The word used there is above reproach. I'm going to use the word personal integrity because hopefully it connects with you just a little bit. If you desire to lead in the church, you need to have some personal integrity. Now, it's probably not rocket science, but it's tricky because what sometimes happens is that we tend to live this double life. You know, we're on one side of things, we do certain things, but when we're at church, we do certain other things. And it's that dualism that's being referenced here. This is the idea that there isn't a corner of your life where there's something secret going on. There isn't a corner of your life where you say, God has all of that, but he doesn't have this. There isn't a spot where you say, I reserve this for myself. This idea of being above reproach means if someone poked a finger at you, probed and pried in your life, they may find something, but it must be covered by the grace of God. There's got to be this openness to God in all of your life. The ability for grace to be applied. Certainly, if you looked at someone like myself, you could take an investigation and you'd find certain corners of my life where there were some things that happened that I'm not proud of, that aren't right. But what you would find is every single one of those, as far as I know, is covered by the grace of God. So if you're thinking about spiritual leadership, you're interested in who God wants you to be in the life of the church, the very first place that you have to start, this tells us, is what's going on inside of you? Does your walk and your talk match up? Or are you making every effort to see that it has? And where there is darkness, have you allowed the grace of God to be applied to this? This isn't about legalism, it's about a principle. The principle is every part of your life needs God's grace. And if that's true of you, then you should think about leadership in the church. And if not, you should say, God, help me. Let your grace be applied. Here's the second thing. The words here is kind of husband of but one wife. And I've called that faithfulness in marriage, if you like. I want to deal with two things real quick. First one I want to deal with is this doesn't mean, some people say, well, this means that only men can lead in the church. Right? Not even going there, that's not what this says. Second, only married men can lead in the church. We're not going there either because that's not what this says. You know what this says? It says, are you satisfied with what you have? You see, men or women, it's irregardless. What matters is here, it says, husband of but one wife. In other words, are you committed to the relationship you have? Are you committed to being faithful to the things that you have? Is that the end of the story? Or are you busy in your life saying, this is not good enough. There's something else out there that'll satisfy. There's something more that will bring something to me. God is saying what matters to him is the very intimate relationships that you have need to be about faithfulness. You need to be sowing into those areas. Can you imagine a leader for a minute who said, I'm not happy with this. I want more. I want a more. And nowadays, maybe not so much the idea. Their culture was another wife. In our culture, it's not another wife. It's maybe an affair, something more entertaining, frightening, but true. What's the principle here? It's not the affair. It's what's going on in the heart. An affair doesn't start by, some relationship you have. It starts here and here, where you are driven by something else. And what God's saying to us in this is, listen, if you want to lead in the church, you're going to have to be satisfied with what you have and love that and cherish that and so into that. We live in a world, they lived in a world where men were the only ones who led. And we don't live in that world. We live in a different world, and what we look for is we look for those who will truly be committed to the most intimate relationship you have. That's a part of leadership. It's a cost. It's an important part of leadership. When you are married, for example, you would say, "Till death do us part." And that's why it matters. In leadership, it's a priority, it's a principle. Here's the third one. The word is temperate. It's an old-fashioned word, but the idea here is this. If you want to lead in the church, you have to start by leading yourself. You have to lead yourself. And it's all very well to sit back and say, you should fix it, you should do, or I'd like to get hold of this leadership and I'd make a few changes around here. This is telling us clearly that if you want to be recognized as for leadership in the church, you've got to be able to lead yourself. You've got to be able to get up in the morning and saying, that's not going to happen in my life, or that is going to happen in my life. That's self-leadership. It's one of the keys of the church ministry. Actually, it's a problem in our society today because we want someone else to take responsibility for our problems. We want someone else to deal with it. You make sure the playground has got soft carpet there so that if I fall off, I don't hurt myself. You make sure the chairs aren't stacked more than 8 high. I understand all this, by the way. But what I'm saying is, somebody else has to take the responsibility for me. That's how our society is wired up. But the Spirit tells us this. If you want to lead in the church, you've got to be responsible for you. Temperance is about this idea of moderation. It's the idea of looking at my life and saying, where are there any kinds of places that I don't show restraint? Where is it in my life where I don't show restraint, where I just abandon myself to whatever it is? See, moderation, as hard as it's about tempering, it's about moderating, tempering, good words. Where do I show lack of restraint? Is there anything in my life that I secretly do to excess? What about purchasing stuff? Sometimes, I got to have that latest, newest, best thing. I got to get can't just have that. It's got to be that. I got to have another one of those. That sometimes drives our society. I know no one here is like that, but our society is a bit like that, where there's this drivenness towards, I got to have the best. I got to have this. I got to have that. Again, spiritual leadership is about moderation. It's about restraint. It's about the ability to be in control, which is actually the next point, self-control. That's a close cousin, and I put it here separately. So it's mentioned separately. I think it's different enough to treat separately. This is the ability to be self-controlled. One is about moderation, not about excess. The other one is about self-control. This extends the idea that I don't always say what I think. Sometimes I check what's being said. It's not about just have to have my say. Sometimes self-control is saying, you know what? Lenore said, for the sake of the other, I choose. Not just to keep it in until I can say it to someone later. Not just to keep it in until it gets to a point where I can't keep it anymore and I'll let it out anyway. No, but self-control says, no, Paul, what does Paul say? He says, I beat my body and I make it my slave so that after I have testified to everybody else, I myself might not be disqualified for the prize. What is he saying? He's saying, come on, guys, if you want to be a spiritual leader, it comes down to the self-control that you have in your life. If you can't control yourself, how can you lead others spiritually? If you fly off the handle, if you overreact, it's hard to be a credible leader. If you bite, chew, tell people, or I don't know, just can't think of some exact examples. Maybe you can for yourself, and for someone else maybe probably easier, But if you want to be a leader in the church, you need to ask yourself, can I operate with self-control? Actually, I've got a better idea, a much more frightening idea. If you want to know if you're self-controlled, ask someone else. Ask someone else. If you really want to know, and if you really want, because what happens is we forgive ourselves so much more easily than we'll forgive someone else. We'll give ourselves grace so much more easily than we'll give someone else grace. Well, I just said what I had to be said. Someone had to say that. I had to say it. You know what? No, well, and then, we might say, well, my life's ordered, and if people got their life ordered like me, everything would be okay. And someone might say to you, do you know what? When you said that, you really lacked a bit of self-control. It would be a tough thing to hear. Who here would be... No, I'm just kidding. It's hard, isn't it? Questions are asking us this: if you want to be a leader, spiritual leader, if you want to be a spiritual leader, one of the keys is self-control. And if you don't know if you've got it, then ask someone who can help you. Here's number 5. Respect. Respectable. What does this mean? In its simplest form, it means, can people respect you? Can they respect you? Can they hold you in regard, high regard? Are you a respectable person? Do people respect you? Do they see good in you? Are you someone they could follow? Could they trust you? That's a question for a spiritual leader. Let's take the opposite. What if you were disrespectful? Disrespectable. I don't even know if that's a word. Someone can help me. What if you were disrespectable? It's hard to follow someone you can't respect. Who's been there? Doesn't matter what they do. Doesn't matter how smart they are. Doesn't matter anything about the money they have, the car they drive, the cleverness of their speech. It doesn't actually matter. As soon as there's an issue of respect, it won't make any difference the rest of stuff in your life, but that will absolutely kill any kind of leadership aspirations you had. It matters. So it's worth looking at. You want to be a spiritual leader? Ask yourself, is anyone following you? Because they always say that, if you're leading and you turn around and no one's there following you, then you're not really leading. It's the same in spiritual leadership. If there's no respect, it's very hard to lead. Here's number 6. Hospitality, or being hospitable. Now, immediately, some of you are thinking, yeah, you've got to put on a meal for people at home and invite them to your place. But no, I want to get to the principle of this again. What's the principle of this? I want to say this. If you've never shown a generous spirit to someone else, caring for them, you probably need to think again about leadership. And so we think about when this was written, in the context it was written to the early Christians in the first century. Hospitality in those particular places was about giving up yourself for somebody else. So a new person, a visitor, take it back even to the Old Testament times. What does it mean? You actually stopped what you were doing. You spread out the feast. It cost you for the stranger, the alien, the visitor. It cost you time, your priorities, and it cost you something in the way of, sacrifice the prize cow for them. You didn't even know them. So the question for us in leadership is, what kind of attitude do you have to the new, the visitor, the stranger? And is it one that says, I'll give my time to you. I'll show my compassion to you. You see, what you have to do if that happens in your life is you have to give up your agenda. Now, we live in this society where we have lots to do. Like, there's no doubt about it. There's a priority, and you've got to get there. And any interruption in it is hard. And yet, the principle here about spiritual leadership is this: are you willing to take time out of your moments of focus to share with those who are in need? That's the word I think that's here. That's a spiritual principle that's here. And if not, then it's going to be very hard to lead people spiritually. Jesus, I think, sets the classic example for this. You know, he has a trajectory. Nathan mentioned it this morning. He said, I desire to celebrate this feast with you, but he knew where he was going. You know, he knew it was to the cross and he knew it was to death. Same kind of story happens with a guy named Bartimaeus, and you know, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. There's a focus and a purpose of where he's going to go, and there's this blind beggar in their society, the kind of lowest of the low out there, you know, just a rung up from the leper kind of a deal, is this blind guy, and he's begging. Jesus has got a focus. He's got all the church around him, the believers and the disciples, and they're just going to achieve things. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And then the disciples, being good Christians, said, shut up. You know, don't talk to Jesus. He's got a job to do. I mean, he's going to die on the cross for all mankind. And Jesus said, it's okay. I got time for him. I got time for him. Yes, I got all mankind to die for, but that can wait. I've got time for him. Come to me. It's funny how Christians change their tune when Jesus speaks. Oh, come. He's talking to you. I think that tells us a little bit about the kind of principle that we deal with when it comes to hospitality. Would we be willing to stop what we're doing for the sake of someone who needs Jesus lost? That's the key right there. And if not, it's okay. Spiritual leadership's not for you. But if you want to be a spiritual leader, it's time to open your eyes up to those around us who desperately need us. Here's number 7, able to teach. Before you panic, that's not about you standing up here and doing this job. Although for some of you it is. Do you want me to point to you? All right. I could, but I've pointed you to in other moments with my voice and speaking to you. I've spoken to you. Some of you should be teachers. You should be standing here and you should be sharing what God has given you, your insights with us. But that's not what this means. What this means is, can you tell someone else how to live the faith life? Can you help them on their journey? Can you articulate what the scriptures say to help someone take the next step in their faith life? That's your job, by the way. That's not my job, any more than your job. And it's only hard because we don't do it to ourselves. We don't lead ourselves. But if you're leading yourself, you're listening to God, you're learning from Him the scriptures that we even heard this morning, then what happens is when someone's struggling with something, you can help them on that faith life. That's the able to teach, able to help them take that journey. If you want to be a spiritual leader, but you don't know how to articulate your own faith life, how is it possible to lead somebody else? It's not about knowing all of the Bible and every bit and piece and somehow being a teacher. No. Who's the best teacher? Someone who can show you how it's done. Someone who can walk beside you. Someone who can help you grapple with those issues. That's what God calls us to. The scriptures tell us. Paul says to whoever he was writing to at the time, he says, listen, by now you should be teachers or able to teach, but you still have to be fed with a spoon. He didn't say that, but something like that. You still need a bottle. You still got to drink milk. You still want someone to hand your peas to you on a spoon with honey. He says that's not how the spiritual life works. That's not how it works. You don't keep getting fed. That'd be like having 40-year-old babies asking for a bottle. That's not how it works. You've got to grow up. You've got to chew meat. And you've got to be able to tell others about it. That's part of how it works in the spiritual leadership realm as well. Let's look at the next verse, verse 3. And I'll keep moving real quick. It says, don't be a drunkard, not violent but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. Not being a drunkard, what does that mean? Is this idea that you can't drink? No, again, it comes down to this. What's got control of your life? If you can't control the alcohol you drink, then that's got control of your life. And you can't be a spiritual leader if there's somebody else or something else controlling your life and it's not the Holy Spirit. If you're in control by drinking or whatever it might be, the thing I struggle with most is eating too much. What is it that controls your life? If it's controlling your life, it's got to be worked on. It's got to be thought about. It's got to be carefully molded and helped. And that's what this principle is. And some people we read past and go, well, I'm not a drunkard, so I'm okay. No, but it's not like that. It's what's controlling you. If you want to lead in the church, ask yourself this question. What's controlling me? What takes my ability to control myself away? What is it that takes over my life at times? Number 9 is not violent but gentle. I love this contrast, not violent but gentle. It's trying to help us see. And in some ways, is it the idea that those people who throw punches can't lead in the church? Or is it the idea that those people who don't have any spine can lead in the church? Not at all. That's not what this means. It means everything you do must be done with gentleness. You have to lead with gentleness. And at times you have to do hard things and tough things, and at times that they hurt. But what should be evidence in the life of a leader is this gentle spirit, the compassion for the people. And one of the hardest things in leading the church is that at times we'd like to tell people a few things. I remember someone saying to me, this might shock you, but they don't come here anymore, so I can talk about it. Came to me and said, I'd like to preach. I said, okay. Why? Got some things I'd like to tell the church. I said, well, that's why you're disqualified for the job. I don't understand. I said, here's the deal. I might tell the church some things, but there's one overriding thing that you perhaps don't understand, and that is I love them. I love the sheep. I care about the sheep. I'm compassionately committed to them. They matter. I will only tell them what I think will help them. It's not because I want to fix them. It's because I care for them. Until you have the same compassion in your heart and life for the people, then you have no right to tell them anything. It's this heart of love. That's what they're talking about here. It's not a matter of fixing things in the church. It's a matter of gentleness. It's a matter of love. It's a matter of compassion. It's a matter of care. And it's not a matter of driving them with a stick or coming in and saying, you guys get to be fixed, or angry, or manipulative, or lording it over people. That's not the leadership in the church. Jesus said this, you shall not lord it over people, but humble. This is the kind of spirit that Christ tells us about. This is the kind of spirit you look for in leaders, not telling so much as loving. Number 10 is not quarrelsome. You've met people like this. They're always looking for trouble. It's about the legal side of things. It's about, you did eat pork. That's it. You're out. It is the Saturday, or it's not the Saturday, or you know that. It's quarrelsome. They're looking for ways. I love what Paul says to Timothy. He says, many, many times he says, don't get involved in unwholesome petty arguments about things. He said, they can ruin your faith. They will ruin your faith. They will suck out of you the very thing that matters. It will kill it. So he says, don't do it. And you can't really lead if that's your way. Number 11 is, and nearly done, not a lover of money. is a hard one. Yeah, God says you can't have a passion for money and a passion for me in the same kind of thing. Now, first up, let's just say this. God likes money. He's happy with money. You can have money. You can earn money. There's nothing actually wrong with that. And those of you who are gifted to do just that, keep on doing that. That's a great gift God has given you. And use your money generously for whatever God calls you to use it for. But if you want to lead in the church, you can't lie awake at night desiring wealth and fame and money. It's a hard one, but it's true. The great thing about God is he says, look, focus on me, I'll take care of the rest. He didn't say focus on me, I'll make you rich. He said, focus on God and I'll take care of the rest. Spiritual leadership is about focusing on God. You cannot serve both God and money. You cannot serve the God of money or the God of gods. You've got to have an allegiance, and your allegiance can't be lying awake at night thinking, how can I get more of that? It must be like lying awake at night and thinking, how can I get more of him? That changes everything. That qualifies you, by the way, to be a spiritual leader. And it's because you can get pierced. Down in Timothy chapter 6, Paul says it again. He says to Timothy, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. He didn't say, as is often misquoted, and I only heard it just the other day on TV, money is the root of all evil. Rubbish. It's not. It never is. It's inanimate. It doesn't matter. It's like pork is not the root of all evil, right? It's not. What's the root of all evil is what happens inside of me. And the trouble with money is that it grabs a hold of me and I've got to have it. And that's the same kind of thing that should happen with God. You can't have them both. And I've often thought, and Phil McCullum helped me with this, he said, when we worry about money or we desire to win the lottery or we have to have some money to pay my bills, or suddenly what happens is our allegiance goes to money. Money, come and save me. Huh? Save me. If you would just land in my lap, my life would be better. Money, if you would just help me pay my bills. Money, if you would help me with this and that, purchase it, whatever. That's our prayer and our worship. And that's why I think he says it very clearly. You can't pray to and worship money. You must worship me. That's a quality for spiritual leaders. Number 12, manage your own household well. The scripture here is clear, and it says, he must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? Again, this doesn't mean you can't lead if you don't have a family or you don't have kids. See, here we're going to get ourselves in troubles if we say you have to be a man, you have to be married, and you have to have kids. You're missing the point. That's not what it's saying. It's saying you have to lead the very people you're with. The very people you're with. And if it's you're in the family, lead your family. Lead your family. Lead your staff. Lead in your friendship group. Lead spiritually already. There's a saying that goes in business, in performance selecting, recruitment and selecting, and it goes like this. Best predictor of future performance is past performance. So in spiritual leadership, it's the same. It's saying, show me you can lead your family. And if you can't lead your family, who else are you going to lead? If you can't lead wherever you are, so that's worth looking at. We're almost done. Second last key, not a recent convert. I'm sorry for you if you've just recently come to faith, but this is not for you. And why? Because pride gets in. There are just some things you learn over time in your spiritual walk, maturity and experience that changes the way you're able to lead. Number 14, last, says you need to be well thought of by outsiders, not just those inside. Are you able to be respected? Now, this isn't a matter of everybody outside likes what you say or you are like them. It just means that to be able to lead, you need to be respected. You don't have to be you don't have to do what they do, but you still need to be respected. Right, let's conclude. At first glance, this looks like a tough leadership list. But when you look at it closely, you can see that it makes a lot of sense, actually. And when you look at it and you break it down in sort of more of our current day thinking, you can see that rather than a legalistic set of rules, they're pretty good principles of how to select good godly leaders. And if you were sitting in the pew and you said, I wouldn't mind having a leader like that, that'd be a good leader to have in the church. You know, it's common sense, it's good thinking. And the interesting thing is Paul tells Titus and Timothy that they can expect to find these people in the local church. Right here. Right here. Let's not 2,000 years ago, right here. Paul would tell us the same thing. He would say, Lex, Nathan, you'll find them in Hills Church. You'll find these people at Hills Church. You'll find them here. Have a look around you. And if they haven't quite got a couple of those things together, they will with time. You love them, you help them, you encourage them. Leadership here takes, it's a serious matter. And you know yourself, if you've been in church for a while, there are some consequences for not taking this kind of approach to leadership. And when someone gets in leadership and they don't have some of these qualities, or they don't want to have some of these qualities, they aren't even trying in those sort of areas, it actually can be some of the most difficult times you'll ever have in the life of the church. Why do they tell us? Why does Paul keep reiterating this? Look for leaders who have these qualities, because he knows that's what helps the church. It's the contrast between super apostle and spiritual leader. Between the super apostle and the spiritual leader. So here's the list again. If you're interested in spiritual leadership, it starts with you. Are you a person of integrity? Are you faithful in your most intimate relationships? Do you live a life in moderation? Are you able to be self-controlled? Do people respect you and look up to you? Do you go out of your way with personal and financial cost to show people the love of God? Are you able to pass on the principles of faith and the purpose of faith? Are you free from the control of other things or people? Are you gentle and loving with others? Are you able to make your point and still be at peace with others? Are you free from the desire to get more and more wealth and things? Are you able to manage those in your realm of influence? Have you been growing and learning in the faith for a while? Are you respected by people outside the church? If you are on your way in these things, you're ready for leading the sheep. And I encourage you to do just that. Some of you today, it's time to get off the chair and say, I will. Some of you today, it's time to say, when are you going to grow up? When are you going to take the responsibility that God has given you? When are you going to lead the way He's been training you to lead? And I encourage you to do just that. You can chat to Pastor Nathan about that. Now, some of you be sitting there, you say, well, I'm not quite there yet. Today I can see some things where I don't measure up, but I still would one day like to be a spiritual leader in the church. Well, here's the key. If you want to be selected for leadership in the church, then you can start the process any time. Look at one of these principles, ask God to help you with it, and grow. And the final point I want to make today is this. If you ever wondered how leaders are selected, now you know. This is the kind of people you look for in the church. This is how leadership is judged best. It's not based on a reference or training or background or whatever. It's based on these kinds of things, these ancient practices. They're 2,000 years old at least, and they're just as important today as they were when they were written. And my prayer is that many more spiritual leaders raised up here at Hills who'll give God everything and see what He will do. Amen.